Last year, around this time, I was on the road driving home. I was on my way back from my brother's place, which was a solid hour's drive from where I live. The clock in my car read just past 10, and I remember thinking that I should be home by 11 if I kept up my pace. The road was mostly empty, which it usually was at that hour. Because of that, I might have been going a bit over the speed limit, nothing crazy, just a little faster than I should. I have no excuses or anything, but it is important for the story. Suddenly, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror coming up fast, then flashing lights, but no siren. I knew I was being pulled over right away, so I slowed down and scanned the shoulder to find a good spot to stop. The car didn't look like your typical police cruiser, or like one of those unmarked cars you hear about. I hadn't been pulled over in a long time, because I'm usually a very safe driver. As I began to stop, signaling to pull over to the side, my car came to a halt, and I saw the police car stop behind me. The flashing lights were now off, and with that, there was really nothing about it that looked like a police car. It was an older, dark green car that I think was a Chrysler, but I don't know my car logos that well, so I could be wrong. Then a police officer stepped out of the car and approached mine. He was a pretty standard-looking cop in uniform, even though it was an unmarked car. He was about 30 years old, 6'2", with sunglasses, even though it was dark out. Right from the get-go, his attitude was off-putting, no polite introduction, just straight to demanding my license and registration with a tone that felt unnecessarily harsh. I get that I shouldn't have been speeding, but I would have expected more professionalism from him. I complied, but his demeanor only seemed to get worse, making me feel uncomfortable. Things escalated quickly from there. After taking a glance at my license and registration, the officer began questioning me about where I was going and where I was coming from. Nothing that a cop wouldn't normally ask, but something about him seemed off. I explained that I was just coming from a visit with my brother. My answers didn't seem to satisfy him. His questions became more probing, even personal at times. Then, without much warning, he ordered me out of the car. "Step out of the vehicle." "Now," he barked, shining his flashlight directly in my eyes. That felt more like an intimidation tactic than anything else. By this point, my nerves were shot. Everything about the encounter felt wrong, and alarm bells were going off in my head. I've always been told to comply with the police, but this didn't feel safe. I hesitated, my hands gripping the steering wheel. "Is there a problem, officer?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. But instead of answering, he just repeated his demand more forcefully. That's when I decided that I couldn't just step out of the car. I knew it wasn't my choice, though. I watched some police body cam videos on YouTube, so I knew what happened to people when they don't get out when ordered. I knew I didn't have much time before he pulled me out. In a few seconds after his request, I did the only thing that made any sense to me at the time. I dialed 911. I told the dispatcher that there was a cop trying to get me out of my car and that I was scared. At that time, I was hoping they would send a supervisor over to take over the traffic stop. But when I looked back up at the officer, I saw that he had returned to his vehicle without another word. With that, I was alone again on the dark road, still on the line with dispatch. I told the man on the line what happened and that I saw the unmarked car drive off. "Can you describe the vehicle or the officer?" he asked. I did my best to recall the details, the make of the unmarked car, the color, any distinguishing features, and what the officer looked like. In the heat of the moment, though, I realized I hadn't paid enough attention to the specifics that would make him identifiable. He didn't give me a name or badge number either. I did think to ask for them in the moment, but I was too afraid that he would flip out on me if I did. The dispatcher's next words sent a chill down my spine. "We don't have any officers in your area doing traffic stops at this time," he informed me. The dispatcher then added that they don't have unmarked cars doing traffic stops at all. In fact, I later learned that it's against the law to do traffic stops in unmarked cars in my area. With that information, it was pretty obvious that I had encountered a fake cop. He probably bought the lights off of Amazon and got a fake uniform somehow. Whether it was a sick but harmless joke, I'm not sure. What really troubles me, though, is that he wanted me out of the car. I can only imagine what would have happened if I did that, but it couldn't have been good. 911 told me that they were sending somebody out to find the guy, but I don't know if he was ever caught. It's a pretty serious crime to impersonate a cop, so I hope they found him before he got anybody else. This happened when I went on vacation with my family during the summer. There was a lodge up north in our state of Michigan, where we had gone once before. Since the kids were on summer vacation and my wife was only working part-time, they went up early. I couldn't get the time off work, so I went up later, allowing them to have an extra 2 days. The lodge was a solid 5-hour drive from our home. It was a nice place, located in the woods, right on a large lake. I didn't manage to leave the office until just after 6 p.m. on Friday, thanks to a last-minute emergency. Once I got off, I went home and had a shower, then a quick dinner. By the time I finally hit the highway, the sun was setting. It was almost 8 in the evening. The journey was uneventful for the most part. I had the radio on, but I really just wanted to get there and start to relax. Eventually, I turned off the main highway. As I continued, the roads became more remote. I remembered the way from the last time, but it seemed the roads were much worse than before. The lodge was about 30 minutes down this path according to the directions. I was careful at first, navigating the bumps and potholes, until a particularly nasty one took me by surprise. I hit it hard, and immediately the car lurched awkwardly to one side. I knew instantly that I had blown a tire. I managed to pull slightly over to the side, but the road was pretty narrow, and I was still blocking almost half of it. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal, but it was spotty at best. However, after a bit of wandering down the road, I managed to find a few bars, enough to make a call. I dialed the lodge, and one of the workers picked up. I explained that I had broken down not far away due to a popped tire. The receptionist told me they had a handyman who could help. He called back 5 minutes later and told me that he was on his way. I was relieved and trudged back to my car, settling in for what I hoped would be a short wait. As the minutes went by, I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through some pictures and trying to get service. I got bored, put my phone away, and glanced up, hoping to see headlights coming down the road towards me, but there was nothing. It had still only been 10 minutes, and I knew it would be at least a 30-minute drive. Suddenly, a tap on my window rang out. I looked up to see a face peering at me, barely illuminated by the interior light of my car. I was startled at first, thinking it might have been the guy from the lodge, but it was still too early. I rolled down my window anyway to talk to him. I then realized that the man didn't have a vehicle, at least, not one that I could see. He asked me to open my door and come out, but something about his demeanor didn't sit right with me. I asked him if he was from the lodge. He told me that he was, but I still wasn't convinced. I paused before saying anything else and asked him where his car was. He told me it was parked around the corner. That didn't make any sense. If he was going to replace my tire, he would need some gear. Leaving his car far away made no sense. I didn't think he was the guy sent to help me, so I refused to come out. With no warning at all, he kicked the side of my car, and I heard a loud thud. I quickly rolled the window all the way up and made sure the doors were locked. Then he began to slam his fists against the glass and kick the door repeatedly. I was trapped and afraid that at any moment the window would give way. The man's temper tantrum on my car went on for a while. I hunched down in my seat, trying to ignore him. I had nothing to defend myself with and no way to call for help since my phone had lost signal after the initial call to the lodge. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more desperate, headlights appeared up ahead on the road. It was a pickup truck, and I assumed it was my help from the lodge. The man outside seemed to hesitate as the truck pulled up next to my car. I glanced back to where the man had been, but he was gone. I didn't see which way he went. A man got out of the truck, a sturdy guy in his 50s, with a friendly face. I got out to greet him. We walked around my car to check on the damage. I also told him about the crazy situation that had just happened. Like I thought, my tire was blown out, but when I went to the driver's side door, the damage was even worse than I expected. The metal part of my door was caved in, and the window was shattered, still intact, but shattered. The worker managed to replace the tire with my spare, and I was on the road again in no time. Once I made it to the lodge, I reported what happened, and they called the cops. When I was out there with the handyman, he told me there was another similar complaint, although not quite as intense as mine. I guess there was a crazy guy out there, but I never really found out more about him than that. Whether he had some kind of Unabomber-style cabin out there, I'm not sure. I never saw him again, and we had an alright weekend, despite the scare. I was driving home late one night. It was mid-April, and it had rained earlier, so the roads were a little wet. I was stopped at a red light just a few miles from my home. There was one car ahead of me, but other than that, I was basically alone. Suddenly, I felt a hit from behind. My car lurched forward, and my head snapped back against the headrest. I knew right away that I had been rear-ended. It was the first time that had ever happened to me, so it was a shock. After I had a moment to gather myself, I checked my rearview mirror and saw the other car, a dark-colored one with its headlights too bright. As soon as the light turned green, we both pulled into a nearby church parking lot. It was a quiet, well-lit space, just what we needed to sort the whole thing out. To his credit, the guy who hit me pulled in right behind me, never trying to flee. I stepped out of my car and checked the damage to my bumper. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was definitely not minor. I would probably need a whole new bumper, which would have been at least a few $100. The other driver stumbled out of his car right away. I could tell that he was drunk. His movements were too slow, and his speech was slurred. At first, I thought the wet roads could have been the reason that he hit me, but now I knew what really happened. I got hit by a drunk driver. He walked up to me and said, "Hey, man, sorry about that. It doesn't look that bad, right? Well, it could be worse, but it's more than just a scratch. How about we exchange insurance and get out of here?" I offered. "How about I just give you $100 and we forget this ever happened," he suggested, swaying slightly as he spoke. I shook my head, dismissing his offer. "No, we need to handle this properly. Looks like more than $100 worth of damage anyway," I said firmly, reaching for my phone. As soon as I took out my phone, the man got desperate. "No, please, man, don't do that. I can't have the cops involved," he pleaded. I ignored him and called 911 because I didn't know the non-emergency number. As soon as I hit the call button, he made a move towards me, slapping my phone out of my hand. It skidded across the parking lot and landed right near a small puddle on the pavement. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to do. I looked back at the man. "Look, I'm sorry. I just can't get arrested. Please. Let's figure this out," he said. This guy was getting desperate, and I obviously knew why. We both knew that if the cops came, he would go to jail for a DUI. I was feigning ignorance, but really, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. This dude shouldn't have been on the road. He already hit me, and if he went back out there, someone else could actually get hurt. And after he literally slapped the phone out of my hands, I wasn't in the mood to be doing him any favors. My next move was to pick up my phone, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my way to it. Things were getting pretty seriously out of control. I had some random drunk guy getting in my face, with no way to call for help. I tried to maneuver around him to get my phone, but he mirrored my movements. It was clear that he was willing to do more than just slap my phone out of my hand to prevent me from calling the cops. "Look, we don't have to get the police involved, but I'm not just gonna walk away from this," I attempted to reason with him, hoping to de-escalate the situation. I thought that if I could just get to my phone, then we could handle everything else later. He wasn't having it, though. His next move was to grab my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, and his face was only inches from mine. "You're not calling anyone," he hissed. I tried to pull my arm free, but I couldn't. I honestly didn't know if I should start throwing punches, or if that would just make things worse. It wasn't a full-blown fight, but he was definitely assaulting me, and he wouldn't let go. He had a firm grip on the sleeve of my jacket, but I couldn't just get it off without my arm, which he was holding. I managed to twist around and get some leverage. With that, I lifted him off the ground and almost managed to break his grip. He held on, though. When his feet landed back on the ground, I looked at his face. Something about it made me think that he was about to start swinging. Just then, the sound of a police siren blared, and it was close. In an instant, the man's attention shifted, and he released his grip on me, looking around frantically. A police cruiser turned into the parking lot, its lights flashing. The officer behind the wheel stepped out of his vehicle with a hand on his holster. The sight of the officer seemed to sober up the drunk driver a bit, and his posture deflated. The officer approached us and asked what was going on. I told him that my car was hit and explained the other stuff that happened, but I didn't mention that the other guy was drunk because I thought it was obvious enough. I then got to my phone, which was still connected to 911. I didn't know at the time that they can actually trace your location if you call 911. You don't even have to say where you are. I was really lucky that I managed to make that call before I lost my phone, because I might have been screwed otherwise. Before I took off, I watched the officer perform a field sobriety test on the other driver, which he failed spectacularly. It was really more of a formality than anything else, because he was obviously drunk. The police officer let me go, and I got the man's insurance information as well. It was pretty scary being alone with that man. I think he would have done a lot to avoid going to jail, and that could have been real trouble for me if the police didn't show up when they did.